Alright everybody, so it's finally time for the Legends Flashback with all its 50 games. Let's check it out. There's that seal of quality. Okay, so I took my time putting this review together because I wanted to make certain I was covering everything this machine can do, which includes some things that aren't advertised. But we'll get to that later. First of all, let's have a look at what's inside the box. Look at this unholy union of former rival gaming mascots of bygone eras. What a time to be alive. Starting off, there is a manual, but unlike some of the other consoles where it's a typical stapled manual, this one folds out like a poster for some reason. You get 2 wired controllers. An HDMI cable is not included, but I mean at this point, you probably either have one to spare or you can just use one from another console. It's not a big deal to me, but I can understand other people being unhappy about it. If you're familiar with AtGames' other products, one of the first things you're going to notice is that the console itself looks very similar to that of the Sega Genesis Flashback, minus the cartridge slot. Because savings. You'll notice there is an SD card port on the back for updating the firmware. And the power supply is just a typical micro USB. Alright, moving along. Now, this is the first AtGames product I've purchased that uses HDMI, and it's a pretty nice presentation. If you didn't like the controllers on the Sega Genesis Flashback, then you won't like these either, as they are the same, but luckily you can just switch to a regular Sega Genesis controller. That's better. Alright, now let's take a look at some of the games that are included with the console. This is definitely an eclectic mix of games, with some being classics from the NES library, and others being arcade ROMs. I've never actually played an arcade ROM on a console before this. It feels very strange playing Galaga with a Sega Genesis style controller. 720p.
I'm bad!
Yeah, you are. The Legends Flashback has a few nifty special features worth mentioning. One of the best things about the Legends Flashback is the ability to use save states. It's particularly good for games with long passwords or lengthy arcade games. Another great feature is the ability to rewind your gameplay by holding down left on the D-pad and start. Did you make a mistake? Just hit rewind. Die prematurely? Just hit rewind. With enough time and patience, you could finish any game in this manner. Selecting a game from the main menu screen will take you to another screen that gives you a little bit of information about the game as well as the control layout, which can be pretty useful. Another thing that's kind of neat is you can pull up this screen that allows you to add quarters before you actually start the game, which I appreciate. I think that's pretty cool. And you can also choose to turn on scan lines for that classic retro CRT look. The menu screen has a very clean layout, much better than some of the previous AtGame releases. This one even has background music, which is not bad at all. You can peruse the available games by favorites, recently played, featured games, all games A to Z, arcade games, and console games. Which definitely seems a bit excessive to me, but being able to select a game based on favorites and recently played definitely cuts down on search time. And as for featured games, well, that's just to showcase some of the more popular titles they scored. Anyway, back to the menu. Settings will allow you to do things like turn off the background music and change the in-game backgrounds. Since all these games are pretty much 4:3, you can choose to have the standard black bars on the sides, or choose from a selection of backgrounds. The About section is where you will find your serial number to register your console with AtGames. You will need to do this if you want to download and install official firmware updates. Which brings us to SD card. If you follow the link in the description below, you will find a custom firmware update. Just follow the directions found there. And once the firmware update is finished, the console will be able to recognize and play legally obtained personal backup ROMs. Let's check it out. Suffice it to say, you'll be able to enjoy a vast library of games in high resolution via the HDMI. And what's really cool is that both the save states and the rewind feature seems to work on the ROMs. So far, anyway. And while there are a few games on here that I don't necessarily love, at the very least we can say that this one isn't overbloated with a bunch of shovelware crap like Yawning Triceratops or Mr. Balls. So it's got that going for it. All of the games look great, and the sound is adequate. I mean, I haven't come across anything so far that was particularly problematic. I'm willing to bet probably not every game on here sounds exactly the way it should, but for the overall presentation and this price point, I can look past that. I would say this is the first AtGames console that I'm actually happy to own. They finally got one right. You can find these right now in the $40 range, and I would say this one is actually worth it given its expansive capabilities. So if you're a person that just happens to have a bunch of NES or Sega Genesis ROMs laying around, this could wind up being a pretty good emulation machine for you, and a much cheaper alternative to the NES Classic Edition. And that's it for the AtGames Legends Flashback. As always, thanks for watching, and see you next time.
I mean, it's not bad. All do is see what you can do with it.